Thank you for coming. I'm very excited. My name is Cassiopeia Fletcher. I go by Cassie because I'm not so cruel as to make everyone use my full 5-syllable name. I am a education junkie, and I am not ashamed to admit it. I have been going to school on a higher education level pretty much continuously for the last 20 years. And this is kind of like the culmination of all of that as I'm working on my PhD. So I have a bachelor's degree in English with a minor in creative writing. And then from there, I went and got my master's of fine arts in creative writing. And then I realized that I had absolutely no way to get people to hire me to teach because I had no teaching experience and I'd never published anything. So I went back to school and got my master's of arts in communications, which was I thought I was changing the entire trajectory of my life, that everything I had done up until that point was entirely useless, and I was just starting over from square one. But that is where I found narrative communications, and I fell head over heels in love. And so I tried to go back to creative writing, just like blanket creative writing. I got accepted into a PhD program, and it was just so bland because it was all the same. Read this book. Now tell me what I think this book is about. Not what you think this book is about. Tell me what I think this book is about. What do I think the author was trying to say by this? And I'm like, I don't want to. And so I was like, no, not for me. So I finished out that semester, got all A's because I was not going to let them say they kicked me out. And then I applied for a new PhD program in communications. And I'm very blessed because one of my professors at this school is one of the current foremost writers in the narrative communications field. So that's been very exciting. And one of the things that I was able to do with him is write this paper. I did it for his class, and now we are revising it for publication. So it's in the process, and you guys get to see it first. Now, this obviously is not the whole paper because that's a lot, but it is just kind of an overview of the main points. And if you have any questions at any point, any comments, just let me know. Happy to answer them. So this is something you have to throw in there because references, so you don't care. It's fine. So we're going to look at the overview, the themes, Carl Jung's archetypes, the Myers-Briggs archetypes, and then why does this matter? Because when you do academic writing, you always have to have a so what? What is the point? Why are you telling me this? So, overview. I will tell all he has done to me from the very beginning, as if I were making my complaint of him before a judge. Him being the god of the Gray Mountain, who she had felt thoroughly wronged by. And this is why we have this story, right? This is why she's telling it. And C.S. Lewis, I love this quote, each of us by nature sees the whole world from one point of view with a perspective and a selectiveness peculiar to himself. What does this mean? This means that we are all the main character in our story. And we forget that we're not the main character in everybody else's story. And so we if we're not careful, we will bring that focus down so narrowly that we turn ourselves into the villain of the stories of everybody around us. So for those of you who have not read Till We Have Faces, just a brief summary. After the death of her mother, Princess Orual's father remarries and his young wife dies, giving birth to a daughter named Psyche. Orual is thoroughly enamored by this baby because she is just so beautiful. And Orual, unfortunately, is extremely homely, and nobody ever shies away from telling her so. And as Orual grows closer to Psyche, the more her relationships with others, including their middle sister Redival, deteriorates. She puts so much of herself into Psyche that it destroys everything else that she has in her life. As Psyche grows up to be kind and beautiful, she eventually is believed by the locals to be a goddess, and they worship her above their own jealous goddess, Unget. To pacify Unget, Psyche is sacrificed to the god of the Gray Mountain, who falls in love with her. So if you don't know, this is a retelling of the myth of Cupid, or Eros and Psyche. Cupid and So Orual goes to rescue Psyche and finds her alive, which is like, what? We sent you to go be devoured by a beast. How are you alive? So she went to go bury her, and she found her sister alive and as far as she is concerned, stark raving mad. She's talking about living in a golden palace and that she's married a god and that she is drinking it's like, here, have this wonderful wine, and like pours water into Orual's hands and says, here, have this succulent bread or whatever, and it's just like berries, and Orual just goes along with it because she's just so happy her sister's alive. But then Orual realizes that Psyche genuinely believes that this is happening, and Orual is very concerned for her sister, and she decides the best way to save her sister is to force her sister to do the one thing that the god of the Grey Mountain told her never to do, and that was to look on his face. And so Orual manipulates Psyche into breaking her promise, and the sisters are torn apart physically, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually. Psyche is thrust into the world to make up for her betrayal, while Orual becomes the lonely, bitter queen of Glome. And this is kind of like a Bronze Age era type story. So we're looking at, Peloponnesian War era kind of Greece. So it's kind of like coming out of the Stone Age and into more enlightened periods, but not fully in that enlightened stage. So Orual's personality internally, she manifests as self-conscious, self-deprecating, self-concerned, self-righteous, and self-defeating. And these seem like they would not go together, but if you've read the story, you know it happens. Whereas externally, she is jealous, deceptive, obsessive, needy, and cruel. And all of these relate to how she interacts with other people. The primary relationships that Orual has is King Trom, who is her father, Princess Redival, who is her second sister, Princess Istra, Psyche being her Greek name, Istra being her traditional Glome name, the fox, who is her tutor, and Bardia, who is the captain of the guard. And then the relationship she has as queen is with Trunia, who is the prince of another nation, who she helps put into a position of power. The fox, who becomes her advisor. Bardia, who becomes her captain of the guard. Darren, who is becomes the high priest of the religion of Ungit. And then, of course, the gods. So themes. She made beauty all around her. One of the most prominent, if not the prominent theme in this is what is beauty versus what is ugliness. And so we have beauty and love, rejection, ugliness, obsession, redemption. And all of these themes build on each other, but it all comes down to this one black and white truth of what is beauty and what is ugliness. Orual fixates on her own physical ugliness and we'll see later, to the detriment of her internal beauty. Redemption. I love this part. This is near the very end, so again, if you haven't read it, spoilers. And so this is the fox. He's talking to Orual after she's been the queen. The fox has passed. This is a dream that she's having. She's very old. She's like in her 70s, and in the Bronze Age, that was old. And so she has just made her court case against the gods, her complaint, and now she's going to be judged. And she says, the gods have been accused by you. Now it is their turn. And she says, I cannot hope for mercy. And he says, infinite hopes and fears may both be yours. Be sure that whatever else you get, you will not get justice. And Orual says, are the gods not just? And the fox says, oh no, child. What would become of us if they were? And it's just this soft, like this is the climax, right? This is as soft a climax as I think you will ever find, but it's so pointed and poignant, and it just is emulsified with truth and light. So Carl Jung. So when I was reading this, I was very struck by how archetypal these characters were, that they were dug down into their essence to become not flat, but anybody, right? Like they were so three-dimensional, and yet they're three-dimensional on the page, like an illusion, right? An optical illusion, like you're walking down the street and you see that chalk art and it looks like there's a giant chasm, and you know it's not there, but your body is like reacting as if it's there. That's kind of what this is. These people are so three-dimensional in such a flat way that you can insert anything into them and pull so many things back out. So the Jungian archetypes, there are 12 archetypes with 12 shadows that make up Jung's theories, based off of self, ego, and soul, and then of course the shadow. So the way that they are combined is that ego and ego creates the hero, self and ego creates the magician, soul and ego the rebel, etc., etc. And so the idea is that all of us at one point in our lives are all of these things, whether we are the light version or the shadowed version, whether we linger in one longer than another, whether we skip over a stage of development entirely and just move on, but maybe we come back to it later. The idea behind Jung is that we are all of these things, not necessarily all at once, but at some point. So taking these ideas and breaking it down, we can see how these characters stagnate, the places where they grow and the places where they're unable to grow. Beginning with the king. The king is extremely stagnant as a character. He is an out-of-control ruler or tyrant archetype. He needs to control. His need to control is shadowed by his inability to successfully lead his country. He is trapped in this one stage of development, and he is unable to move forward because he will not allow his ego to recognize his failings. So he is physically, emotionally, and psychologically abusive of Orual, and he shadowed her innocence into a victim. And one of the few things that other people have the ability to impact is where your shadows fall on your archetypes. And so he took this innocent little girl and he beat her down so much that she turned into a victim. The most prominent manifestation of Orual's shadowed innocence is her obsession with her own physical ugliness and the external beauty of her sisters, which manifests in two very different ways. The way that she sees Redival's beauty is very different from the way that she sees Psyche's beauty, and that, I think, is a reflection of where she is internally. As a shadow ruler, the king is petulant, demanding, unreasonable, and prone to violent mood swings. His only real concern is his present success and the legacy he leaves behind, so far as he gets to choose it. So the reason why he remarries after Psyche and Redival's mother dies is because he wants a son. He wants a son so much that he bought a slave, a Greek slave, to teach this son that he did not have from the wife he did not yet have. So he's just like, whew, all of the forward thinking, very optimistic, but only if he gets what he wants. And with Psyche, he did not. So the fox becomes what their father should have been. He is predominantly a caretaker and a magician. He loves Orual as if she was his own child, and he absolutely dotes on her to the point where he spoils her. His archetypal traits include the sage and the rebel, but his shadow magician traits are the most prominent. So this is where he became stuck, right? In this progressive line of archetypes, he became stuck in his shadow magician. He looks down on any talks of God or mysticism. He feels shame for his own personal love of poetry, and he ridicules Orual and Psyche for belief in what he calls baseless superstition. He elevates logic above everything else to the detriment of his own spiritual well-being. Under his tutelage, Orual develops her own shadow magician. She becomes a pragmatic elitist, shows little tolerance for those beneath her knowledge, experience, or understanding. And this is the most seen with her sister Redival, who is very beautiful, but kind of like a little bit of an idiot. At least so far. And again, we're getting this whole book from Orual's point of view. So for all we know, Redival is like actually a genius, and Orual's just coloring her as an idiot. But she's very superficial and shallow. That at the very least we do get. She has these connections with people that are fleeting and flighty, and she doesn't really make anything of herself. The only thing that she wants is to have a good marriage and to live a good life. Bardia, so the love connections. So Bardia is not her lover, but in Orual's head, he could have been, right? Like, he could have been her lover if she met him first. And so he begins as a predominantly light character. He has the traits of the warrior, the rebel, the everyman, the lover, and the caregiver. In giving him, but he becomes caught in his caregiver phase. He becomes shadowed when he starts giving so much of himself to the kingdom, so much of himself to Orual as the queen, that he starts to lose himself. His devotion for Orual shadows his lover, and turns him in turn makes him neglect his wife, his children, and his personal health. He is devoured by his shadow caretaker, and that is made very apparent when, after he dies, his wife says to the queen, "Your queenship drank up his blood year by year and ate out his life." He gave so much love, so much care, so much devotion, so much attention to this one person, and she ate it up because she needed it, because she is so empty, she can only take and she cannot give. And then he descends again from light lover to shadow lover when he neglects his wife. Psyche is the only character to exhibit all 12 light archetypes, which I thought was really interesting, but also very symbolic, very thematic. So she does have predominant traits, even though she does exhibit all of them. Her predominant ones are the innocent. She's an idealistic dreamer. She's dependent on Orual for her care and attention, and she's unmindful of danger. She moves later into becoming a seeker, where she longs for a golden palace and a great prince for her husband. She's a caretaker. She comforts Orual in the tower and sees to Orual's needs on the steps of the gold palace. She's a warrior. She faces her fate without any fear whatsoever. She is being sacrificed to a monster, and she says, "That's okay. It is what it is. I'm going to roll through it." She's like, "Am I scared? Yes, I'm scared, but I'm going to face it anyway." And then when she is confronted by Psyche, she rises up as a warrior again and asserts herself and says, "I am who I am, and I'm going to fight against this evil that you are bringing to my doorstep." And then she's a lover. She exhibits both strong storge, which, if you have read the Four Loves, is familial love for both Orual and the fox, and then of course Eros, which is romantic love for the god of the Grey Mountain. And then we have the goddess Unget. And from the hints scattered throughout the novel, it's pretty safe to say that the Unget... Yes, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to comment. For those of you, if you haven't read this book, the three sisters sort of come off as the three Bennett sisters. So, Jane, Lizzie, and Lydia.
A little bit. If Lizzie was an obsessive psychotic who was like absolutely eating up Jane from the inside out. But yeah, there's definitely some of that for sure. And I this is an aside, but I genuinely, like there are no original stories, there are no original characters, and a lot of the creative process is figuring out things like that, like the connections like those. Like, what would it be like if Jane and Lizzie and Lydia lived in a world like this? What would they be? How would they turn out? And I will die on this hill. In the Game of Thrones, Sansa is just Anne Shirley from Anne of Green Gables in a really awful medieval world. Anyway, so What other people see in Ungit as Orual interacts with the people around her is they see Ungit as a creator, a caretaker, a lover, a reformer, a ruler, a warrior. And Orual refuses to see that. In Orual's mind, everything that Ungit is shadow. It's dark. She's a tyrant. She's a devourer. She is a destroyer. Everything that she is, she's as far as Orual is concerned, Ungit is the antithesis of Psyche. All of the light traits that Psyche has are mirrored in the darkness of Ungit. But in reality, as you see by the end of the book, Psyche is a mortal type of Ungit. And she's later used as kind of a placeholder for Ungit when Orual goes into the realm of the gods. And she realizes that all of the good that Psyche is all of the good that Ungit is. And all of the darkness and evil and anger and hatred that Orual ascribed to Ungit was actually inside herself the whole time. So, Orual as Ungit's shadow. All 12... I clearly stopped writing that. Orual does, in fact, depict all 12 of the shadowed archetypes in the same way that Psyche shows all 12 of the light archetypes. And so it begins when she realizes that she's ugly. And that is like the impetus of everything that motivates her actions moving forward for the rest of the book. So this, and it's also this incident that sparks her contempt for the gods. And she feels like she has been utterly wronged. And so she derives this sort of perverse sort of pleasure of the fact that, yeah, Redival is pretty, but she's an idiot. And yeah, I might be ugly, but at least I'm smart. And so she's kind of resentful from the very start. And then so after she falls from the innocent, she becomes a victim. And not only, and this is very common of, according to Jung, the shadowed innocent, the victim archetype, is that they have a tendency to victimize people around them. When you have a shadow trait, it's like that whole saying, right? Misery loves company. When you have a shadow trait, you want to push that shadow onto other people so that you're not seeing only your own ugliness, but you're able to look at the ugliness on the people around you and say, see, by comparison, I'm not so bad. So she victimizes her sisters. She victimizes her kingdom. She just pushes all of it. And she can, as far as she is concerned, she can do no wrong because she's a victim. She can do no wrong because she is ugly. And her ugliness excuses anything else that she could do because that's just the price that she has to pay. If she's going to be, she has to be ugly, then at least she can do whatever else it is that she wants. So it's likely that her obsession with caring for Psyche comes from a selfish manifestation of her shadow innocent and shadow orphan traits. Basically, she's treating Psyche the way that she wished somebody would treat her, but she leans into it so far that she starts to try to overshadow Psyche, whereas Psyche, as a wholly light character, cannot be shadowed. And so what she does is she reflects that shadow back to Orual, and when Orual sees it, she hates it and she projects it onto other people, mostly Redival, her other sister. So she's a shadow. She becomes more of a shadow ruler, but they see her as a light ruler, right? Because she's doing all of these positive things, but she's a shadow ruler because she's doing it selfishly. She doesn't care about anybody. She doesn't care about what she's doing. She just does it because that's what you do. So she's a shadow creator. She doesn't build anything for the sake of building it or bettering people. She's just building it because that's what you do. Shadow warrior. She's apathetic and self-destructive. That first battle that she goes into, she's like, if I die, I die. Whatever, it's fine. I don't care. And not considering the fact that it's not just her life that rides on this battle. It's the continuing prosperity of her kingdom as well as the neighboring kingdom. If she loses this battle, then now her kingdom not only doesn't have a ruler, but they also have an embedded enemy. Shadow rebel. She doesn't break the wheel for the greater good, but for the good of her own sound mind. Shadow magician. She mocks, ridicules, and ostracizes not only Redival, but everyone. At every point, even the people that she professes to love feel the sting of Redival's tongue. Shadow sage. She's cold, rational, heartless, dogmatic, and pompous. And the shadow fool. She's not gluttonous or debased like most of the Jungian shadowed fools are, but she takes absolutely no pleasure in anything. She is aloof, she is cruel, and she is mocking. She has no sense of whimsy or joy whatsoever. It's only after Orual has faced her own self-destructive and abusive past self by way of writing and reading her complaint, as well as through her series of divine visions, that she's able to recognize how deeply traumatized she was as the innocent, right? And that when her complaint is finally heard, ironically but also thematically, by a black-veiled judge who stands above her unveiled and naked self, unveiled for the first time in the vast majority of her life. You know, she puts on the veil when she's 20 years old, and then she never takes it off. Not in front of anyone. She hasn't even seen herself. The only person that she has shown herself to is Bardia's wife after his death, and that was more of like a spiteful thing than anything else. But Orual has no choice but to let go of her anger and resentment and embrace the truth of her own shadow self. Only then can she cast off the shadow and accept the light in the form of God's beauty gifted to her by Psyche, who, again, if you'll recall, Psyche is Ungit's light, whereas Orual is Ungit's shadow. So, Myers-Briggs. And the reason I brought this into it is because everybody knows Myers-Briggs, right? Not everybody really knows and understands the Jungian archetypes and the way that they interconnect, but everybody knows Myers-Briggs. I bet if I asked you, any one of you could tell me what your 4 letters are. I can't because I never remember the letters. I just remember like what they actually call the thing. Anyway, so Myers-Briggs is a simplified version of Jung's theories, and it adapts the concepts of the ego, soul, and self into 4 polar categories, utilizing also extroversion and introversion. So E and I is the focus of one's attention, the outward, how do you recharge yourself? And then sensing and intuition is how information is collected. Thinking and feeling is how you make decisions, and judging and perceiving is how you deal with the world. So a 5th modifier that is often used is assertive and turbulent, which determines the level of one's self-confidence and ability to cope with stress. So you can have somebody who is an extrovert and, like an ENTP, whatever. And, they may seem like the most sound when you're looking at it on paper, but when you add a turbulent to it, they become like an emotional psychotic wreck, depending on how deeply they are into their turbulence. Whereas they can also become like this over arrogant, condescending, lordly type, depending on how deeply they are into their assertiveness. So as far as the personality blocking goes, this is probably the most versatile. The Big 5 and all these other ones that they have, this is the one that I find the most helpful when it comes to building characters. Less helpful in like categorizing people in real life, because people are made up of so many different types and facets. But if you're building characters, start here. So the king is an ENFP. So he's a turbulent campaigner. Campaigners are the epitome of the grass is greener. It's like it doesn't matter where you are, over there is going to be better. They are constantly thinking in future possibilities and don't put enough focus on the present. Turbulent campaigners often dwell in the negative without attempting to rectify the situation, which the king does. He realizes that his kingdom is a mess and that things are happening that are outside of his control, but his thought process is, 1, it's not my fault, it's everybody else's fault. And 2, if only this would happen, if only I had a son, if only this, that, or the other thing, then everything would just magically be better. And And they say they're successful because they determine their own success. So the kingdom is falling down around this man's ears, and he's just like, I am the best king this place has ever had because I said so. He's unable to recognize his own faults, and he foists the blame onto other people. The fox, ISTJA, he's the logistician. Reserved, pragmatic, rational, and logical, but they typically fail to adapt to situations that go against their steadfast nature. So when things start to fall apart and take a mystic turn, the fox is completely outside of his element. He has absolutely no idea how to deal with the fact that Psyche is apparently married to some thief, woodcutter, vagabond in the woods and thinks that he's a god. And so he just kind of breaks down under pressure. When in emotional situations, when Orual says, I'm going to take up this sword and put on armor and go fight that guy over there, he threatens her. He's like, he tries to use his love as a weapon in the same way that Orual did to Psyche. So we see where she got that from to force her to not do it, though she goes through with it anyway. But ultimately, he is quiet, steadfast, and dedicated to forethought. Orual is attracted to his logical and rational ways of thinking and observing because they share those traits, right? Bardia, ESFJ, assertive. So he's a consul. Their consuls are commonly accused of being people pleasers, right? They're the ones that want to make sure that everybody, and if they're in a party, they're the one that's going around saying, how's it going? How's the food? How you feeling? Is everything okay? They're those sweetly annoying waiters and waitresses that come like every 5 seconds, and you're like, I'm still fine, thank you. So they have definitive views of right and wrong, very black and white, very cut and dry, very one or the other. If this is wrong, it's wrong. If this is right, it's right. And is there a middle? Yes, but the middle is a line. And they're unswayed from their convictions by threats or authority. When Bardia is ordered to kill the priest of Ungit, he says, I'm not touching that. And the king's like, I'll have you killed. And he's like, bring it on. I'm not touching that. And so, they're also deeply and unwaveringly loyal to people that they feel are worth their loyalty. And that is very important because Bardia really couldn't care less how the king is doing. And honestly, at a certain point, his biggest concern is, what are we going to do when the king dies? Because there's no one who can take his place. But not really upset about, is the king going to die? Is he going to live? Really don't care. And until he realizes that they found that ruler in Orual. And then he gives everything to her. They're not mindless followers of tradition, but they do tend to stick to their convictions. Orual is attracted to his sensitivity to feelings and his respect for her willingness to fight for what she believes in. She creates this love story in her head because he's the first person to treat her like a person as opposed to an object in some capacity. Outside of the fox, but he's already established in her head as a father figure, and so she's able to transfer those feelings of love to Bardia, and she hoards them. She can't do anything with them, but she's going to make sure that nobody else can do anything with them either. So Psyche. Psyche is an INFP or a mediator. She's extremely assertive, but not dangerously so. She's a romantic dreamer, lives inside her head more than in the real world, deeply idolizes those she loves and respects, lives for an ideal future from an age, uncanny ability to roll with the punches when we get into that prison scene, and she's just like, yeah, I'm going to be sacrificed to a beast, and I've made my peace with it. And Orual's like, what are you talking about? And then she can see the big picture, and in her head, if this is what's best for Glome, then that's my place as the princess of Glome, is to give myself on behalf of this kingdom. And she's extremely emotionally stable and able to absorb multiple ideas and probabilities at once, which apparently you spell with a W. Versus Orual, who, so she is able to recognize the depth and focus of love and respect. So Psyche can love people deeply, but she also knows where those lines are, whereas Orual cannot. In Orual's mind, any love that you're giving to somebody is love that you can't give to somebody else. There is no infinite capacity for love. Whereas for Psyche, there is that infinite capacity. Whereas Orual, very self-contained. Psyche has no trouble loving multiple people at once with the same level of devotion. She's able to accept less than ideal outcomes by focusing on the positives, even if those positives are only hypotheticals. And she feels no need to mourn for the past when she is forever looking toward the future. And all of these things are things that Orual cannot do. She is just incapable of, because she has set herself back so deeply. Now, Orual is ISFJ, very turbulent. So she's a defender. And I feel a bit of a kinship to this because my grandma, one of the last things that I asked her that if she would do me a favor is she took the Myers-Briggs test, and she was a defender, and she was also extremely turbulent. And I think maybe that's one of the reasons why when I read this book for the first time, it was after my grandmother had already passed. We had kind of a rocky relationship, and I saw a lot of Orual, or a lot of my grandmother in Orual, in a lot of the things that she did, a lot of the actions that she took, the things that she said. And that helped me connect to her. But so her observing and judging traits make it very difficult for her to see the big picture. She's very much an in-the-moment type of person. She doesn't really look to the future. She just does. She doesn't really look to the past either. She's just constantly living in the moment. She has a strong resistance to change, which is exacerbated by her turbulent modifier. Her love and loyalty are conditional based on the level of love and loyalty that she receives in return. And I think we've all met those people who give off this air of, I'll give you this, but what are you going to give to me? Those relationships that tend to fail because it's like, well, I love you so much and you love me so little. And then again, in relation to Psyche, she believes that everything that she does is for the greater good, when in actuality, it's just being done to make her feel better about herself. So what? Why does this matter? Why did I write this paper? Why are we talking about this? What is the point? So Orual has been intentionally blinded by her own distorted storge, which is familial love, to the point where she literally cannot see the pain she's causing others. She can't recognize her ugly inner self because she's too focused on the external beauty of things. What does the outside look like? Is the outside beautiful? Is the outside ugly? To her, there is nothing below the surface. It's all on the outside. But when she's stripped down bare, the reader is experiencing it by proxy. Not only is Orual able to see the true ugliness of herself, but the reader is put in an uncomfortable, if inevitable, position of having to look at their own self in the same way. Perhaps this is why Till We Have Faces is Lewis's least popular novel, because we cannot bear to be shown our own ugliness, not even beside instructions on how to turn that ugliness into beauty. And this is one of those books that gets so deep inside of you that you cannot extract yourself from it. So, like I said, this book was not well received. Even the good reviews were extremely lukewarm. Interesting, fascinating in its recreation of gloom, and with an appeal for those curious about the spiritual interpretations and religious allegories found in his earlier books. The story is written with all Professor Lewis's old skill and feeling, more convincing and real to us than that of Apuleius himself. Like, these are the rave reviews, right? How much more lukewarm could you possibly get than these people who are trying to find something nice to say, and yet you're so stung by it? Because when you get to the end, and I don't know if I'm the only person who's ever experienced this, but when I get to the end of something, whether it's a film or somebody speaking or it's a book, and it just resonated with something so deeply inside of me that it's almost like there's this moment of absolute stillness, absolute peace and tranquility and motionlessness, like I'm standing atop a lake and the entire thing is thoroughly unmoving. And then there's like that one little ripple and it just goes out and it just goes into infinity. It's hard to explain the feeling that I'm trying to convey, but that's what this did to me. As I got to the end and it just resonated into eternity. It spoke to on such a deeper level than just an allegory about love. So it's likely due to Orual's status as an unlikable yet relatable character that so many turned away from the novel feeling unfulfilled or even guilty. As stated in John 8:7, "He that is without sin among you, let him cast the first stone at her." None of us are without the ugliness of sin. And, getting a little spiritual delving into this, but hey, this is C.S. Lewis. We can do that. Unfortunately, like Orual, it's very easy to be blinded by external appearances. And to Orual, her sister's beauty makes up for her own ugliness. She takes a possessive ownership of Psyche, saying, as long as Psyche is beautiful, at least a part of me is in some way beautiful. And, but it's Psyche's inner beauty herself that ought to have captured Orual's attention. She needed to refocus herself, put herself on a deeper level, realizing that what really made Psyche beautiful was the inside that shone outward, not the outside that was just what was presented to the world. In the same way, Orual needed to recognize that the outer ugliness that she possessed was only exacerbated by the inner ugliness that she allowed to fester. It's through Orual's archetypal journey that Lewis invites his readers to look at their self beyond the persona. For how can God meet us face to face till we have faces? We are all of us Orual. Every single one of us. And when you read this book, you'll feel it. You'll recognize the Orual within yourself, and you can either reject that or you can embrace it and figure out what that means for you for next steps. How are you going to proceed? How are you going to move forward? And how are you going to meet God face to face with your face?